You have been told your whole life that you think too much, that you need to get out of your head, that you are making things more complicated than they need to be. And after hearing it enough times, you probably started to believe something was wrong with you. Maybe you even went looking for a diagnosis, anxiety, OCD, depression, something to explain why your brain never seems to stop. But what if I told you that the thing you have been trying to fix is not a malfunction at all? What if your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do? And what if the real problem is not that you think too much, but that you have been living in a world that thinks too little? Today, we're going to look at the actual psychology behind people who cannot stop analyzing. We are going to separate what is clinical from what is simply a cognitive style. And by the end, you might realize that your so-called overthinking is not a weakness to manage, it is a depth to protect. Let us start by understanding what is actually happening in your brain. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Elaine Aron began studying a trait she called sensory processing sensitivity. About 15 to 20% of the population has this trait, and one of the core features is something she called depth of processing. People with this trait do not just take in information, they integrate it. They compare it against past experiences. They run it through multiple filters before arriving at a response. Brain imaging studies show increased activity in areas associated with awareness, reflection, and emotional processing. This is not anxiety. This is architecture. The problem is that depth takes time, and we live in a world that does not reward time. We reward speed. The person who answers first gets the credit. The person who pauses to think gets talked over. And so slowly, you start to internalize the message that your processing style is a liability. But here's what no one tells you. Speed and accuracy are often in tension. The person who responds fastest is not always the person who responds best. Your brain is trading speed for something else, something most environments do not know how to value. Now, this does not mean every deep thinker is healthy. There is an important distinction we need to make, and that is the difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection is linear. It moves forward. You are working through a problem, weighing perspectives, and arriving somewhere new. It might take time, but it produces insight. Rumination is circular. It loops. You keep returning to the same thought, the same fear, the same regret, without ever reaching resolution. It does not produce insight. It produces exhaustion. And here is the thing most people get wrong. They assume all deep thinking is rumination, that if your brain is active, it must be anxious. But that is not true. Reflection and rumination feel very different from the inside. One feels like exploration. The other feels like a trap. If you are a deep thinker, the goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to learn how to steer, how to recognize when you have shifted from reflection into rumination, and how to gently bring yourself back. But before we get into that, let us talk about why deep thinking is so exhausting. Your brain uses about 20% of your body's total energy, and that's just for baseline functioning. When you engage in deep cognitive processing, that number goes up. You are running complex simulations. You are modeling other people's perspectives. You are holding multiple variables in working memory and testing them against each other. This is metabolically expensive work, and this is why environments that seem easy for other people feel draining for you. Small talk, for example. For someone with a shallow processing style, small talk is low effort. You exchange surface-level pleasantries and you move on. But for a deep processor, there is no such thing as surface level. Your brain is automatically reading subtext, analyzing tone, wondering what the person really means, and tracking the emotional undercurrents of the conversation. You are doing 10 times the cognitive work, even though the conversation looks the same from the outside. This is why you need more recovery time than other people. And this is why solitude is not avoidance, it is maintenance. Now, let us talk about the gifts, because there are real advantages to this processing style that rarely get acknowledged. The first is pattern recognition. Because you are constantly integrating information, you tend to notice connections that others miss. You see the thread running through seemingly unrelated events. You anticipate problems before they emerge because you have already run the simulation in your head. The second is empathy through analysis. A lot of people assume empathy is purely emotional, but for deep thinkers, empathy is also cognitive. You understand people not just by feeling what they feel, but by thinking through what they might be experiencing. You model their perspective, and that gives you an unusual ability to understand people who are very different from you. The third is creative problem solving. Because your brain does not take the first exit, it explores more territory. You consider options that more impulsive thinkers skip over. And sometimes, deep in that exploration, you find a solution no one else saw. These are not small advantages, but they only become advantages if you learn to manage the intensity. So how do you do that? The first strategy is externalization. Your working memory has limits. If you try to hold everything inside your head, you will hit a ceiling and then start looping. The solution is to move thoughts outside your brain. Write them down. Speak them out loud. Put them in a system. This clears the mental workbench and gives your brain space to process the next thing. The second strategy is scheduled processing time. If you are a deep thinker, you are going to think deeply. That is not something you can turn off, but you can give it boundaries. Set aside a specific time, maybe 30 minutes in the evening, where you let yourself fully process the day. Analyze what happened. Think through what it means. Then, when that time is over, you have permission to let it rest. Without this boundary, deep processing can bleed into every moment and leave no room for presence. The third strategy is physical grounding. When you notice yourself shifting from reflection into rumination, your body is often the fastest exit. A few deep breaths, a cold glass of water, a short walk. These are not distractions. They are pattern interrupts. They break the loop and give your brain a chance to reset. The fourth strategy is environment design. Not every environment is a good fit for a deep processor. High stimulus, fast-paced, shallow feedback environments will drain you faster than you can recover. This does not mean you cannot survive them, but it does mean you need to be strategic. Protect your solitude. Limit exposure to environments that treat depth as inefficiency. And when possible, build a life that matches your processing style instead of constantly fighting against it. Now let us zoom out. For most of your life, you have probably been measuring yourself against a standard that was never meant for you. The standard of the quick responder, the decisive leader, the person who does not need to think twice. But that standard is not neutral. It is a product of a culture that optimizes for speed because speed is easier to measure. Depth is harder to quantify. It does not show up on a performance review. It does not win arguments in real time, and so we devalue it. But the world needs depth. It needs people who pause before reacting, people who consider the second and third order consequences, people who can hold complexity without rushing to collapse it into something simple. That is you. You are not broken. You are not anxious just because your brain is active. You are deep, and depth is not something to cure, it is something to channel. So stop apologizing for the way your mind works. Stop performing speed you do not feel, and start building a life that lets you think the way you were always meant to think, because the world has enough people who react fast. What it needs more of is people who see far. If this resonated with you, you might also find value in our video on why sensitive people are not weak. It is a connected idea, and it might give you another piece of the puzzle. You can find it right here. Thanks for watching.